Okay, again, just as a reminder, any questions, you can just post it on the chat. And we'll try and get to it. Okay, so now just trying to, so we were discussing women davening Friday night. I think we finished with that. So we'll just do one more of the davening that comes up a lot, and then we'll get into the cooking, opening. Hopefully we'll try and get to opening the oven doors tonight, and starting the food preparation before Shabbos, the shilas that come up. But first, I think we just should discuss, since we were discussing the davening and the Makabel Shabbos and Kiddush, etc., then we'll let's just finish with that. So I wanted to discuss maybe Kiddush on Shabbos morning. A lot of confusion with women, what they're chayav and what they're not chayav. So basically, the issue with making Kiddush on Shabbos morning, there's two issues. There's one issue, which is eating before davening, which we're not allowed to eat before davening. Nobody, no men, women are not allowed to eat before davening. That's issue number one. Issue number two is that you're not allowed to eat before making Kiddush. Like we discussed a couple of weeks ago, that once the Chachamim Masakin, that the first thing you have to do is have Kiddush, so you're not allowed to eat before Kiddush. So basically, so you have both issues on Shabbos morning. You can't eat before davening, and you can't eat before Kiddush. So like this. So let's go with the eating before davening first. The halach is that you're not allowed to eat before davening. The reason for that is that it's a chutzpah to Hashem, that the first thing you do is to eat before you even daven to Hashem, who's the source of whatever it is that we have. We daven to Hashem to thank Him and to also request that He continues taking care of us. So we're not doing those requests on Shabbos, but the thank you we are doing on Shabbos. So basically, you have to make sure you do that before you start eating. If you eat before you, let's, for lack of a better term, discuss it with Hashem or acknowledge Hashem, then that's a chutzpah to Hashem. However, if you have a reason why you have to eat, a good reason why you have to eat, then you're allowed to do that before davening. So the classic example is drinking. Many people, because you went a whole night, you have a dry mouth, or you need a coffee, etc. So drinks that are not fancy drinks, let's call it that, meaning just your basic drinks, you're allowed to have before davening. So water, seltzer, coffee, the poskim actually discuss coffee, because what type of drink is coffee? Is coffee a drink of convenience, or is it necessary? So for many, many people, coffee is necessary. So, but what about with sugar? If you need the caffeine, so you just take a coffee, a black coffee without milk, without sugar. Putting in milk and sugar, that's already geschmack, and that tastes great. So therefore, that you shouldn't have. But it's been accepted already that nowadays just having a coffee with milk and sugar is considered basic standard, or tea with sugar is considered basic standard drink, and it's not considered a lack of kavod or gaiva to Hashem, and therefore we're allowed to have that before davening. So that's not an issue. But the halacha also says that if somebody is weak and the only reason why they're eating is to have strength to daven to Hashem, then you're allowed to eat before davening. So that's why many in the more in the Hasidish world, since they daven later and they daven for much longer, a lot of times they say the whole Tehillim before the davening, etc., etc. So they have anhaga that they do eat. They do eat before davening. They'll have a little bit of cake or these type of things, and they eat it before davening. Women are a lot of times need that energy to daven and to function, to prepare the Shabbos meal, etc., etc. So we are makel for women to have a little bit to eat, not a lot. You can't sit down to a ton of cake or cookies or whatever before you daven in the morning, but you are allowed to have some cake or whatever food you want, not just drink, in order to give you energy to run a household and to be able to daven. So you're allowed to eat before davening. However, where it gets complicated is once you daven, then you have to stop eating. This goes for men and this goes for women. So even if you have men who are lenient to eat before davening, which, by the way, many poskim say, the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch says that it's better to daven b'yechidus and not eat before davening, meaning better to, if you get up at 7 o'clock and you're not davening till 8:30, so you need some energy to daven. The Kitzur Shulchan Aruch says, and many agree with him, say that it's better for the man to daven alone at home, then eat, and then go to shul to hear Kedusha and Baruch Hu, Kriyas HaTorah, etc., etc. Most of you can daven with the minyan, right? Because it's so important not to eat before davening that it's more important than going to a minyan. Okay, well that's for men, but meaning that's just to bring out the severity of eating before davening. Like we said, though, women could eat no problem before davening, just not a lot, just enough to give you the energy to take care of the household and to daven. Fine. But then that's the halacha of eating before daven. Once you daven Shabbos morning, so the halacha is once you're ready to eat your Shabbos meal, you have to make kiddush before you can eat. And that goes for men, that goes for women. Okay, so now women is going to be a little bit more lenient, but we'll get to that. So basically, once you've davened, you can no longer eat until you make kiddush. So again, let's make that very clear. So let's say you davened at 8 o'clock in the morning, and you are done your davening, shachris, even just shachris. Now, and the people are not coming home from shul until 11, 12 o'clock. You are not allowed to eat. You have to make kiddush first, and there's basically no way around it. There are a couple of leniencies, but let's talk with the basic halacha, and that is that again, once a woman davens, and once a man davens, the chi of kiddush kicks in, and once you have a requirement to have kiddush, then you're not allowed to eat before having kiddush. Okay, so that again, I just want to reiterate the basic halacha. Once why are you allowed to eat before davening without kiddush? Right, so the reason why you're allowed to eat before davening without kiddush and drink before davening without kiddush, because it's not yet time to make kiddush. Kiddush, the requirement to make kiddush only kicks in after you've davened. Before you've davened, there's no requirement to have kiddush. So therefore, you're allowed to drink before davening without kiddush. Right? Again, let's understand that very, very clear. The kiddush requirement only kicks in once you have a requirement to eat the Shabbos Suda. The Shabbos Suda does not start. The requirement for the Shabbos Suda does not start until you've davened. Okay, so again, once you've davened, you have to hear kiddush. Okay. One. Now here's the problem where it gets complicated with women. Not all women daven, right? That's a whole different shir, whether women have to daven, women don't have to daven. But many women just say brachas or say some sort of bakasha, and that's enough. So the question is, if you're one of those type of women, so now do you have to make kid? Let's say you're the type of woman who just says netilas yadayim and asher yotzar and maybe birchas HaTorah or something like that. So then now that's your davening for the day. So now do you have to make kiddush? Right? So that's actually a very it's not complicated question, but it's a very interesting question. Before I'm sorry I didn't say about the shir being Leila Nishmas. The shir is Leila Nishmas Yehuda Shimon Zechron Racha ben Yeshua Yosef Moshe and Aryeh Lev Zechron Racha ben Yeshua Adam Zalman. Their neshamas should have an aliyah. It should be a schus for them and a schus for the rest of Klal Yisrael. Okay, I'm sorry, I meant to say that before. But okay, so going back to this, so now the question is, if you don't do your full davening, are you now chayiv in kiddush? So that's the big shaila. So now then you have a different situation, and we'll get back to all of them to give guidance on exactly how to do it in a minute. But the other issue is, let's say some women during the week don't have the time to daven, but so therefore during the week they just say a small amount of davening. But then on Shabbos, when there's more time, then they do daven. Right. So now that so let's say this woman gets up at 8 o'clock in the morning, and she says her standard brachas, and now during the week that's all she davens, and then but Shabbos usually she davens the whole davening. So now she said her brachas. Can she now drink, or maybe since that's her regular standard davening, now the requirement to have kiddush kicked in? So that's also a problem. So basically, for that one, what we say that a woman should do, if you're one of those type of women who normally davens just brachas during the week, and then on Shabbos davens a full davening, so have in mind when you say the brachas that is not your davening, and therefore you'd still be allowed to eat and drink before you hear kiddush, right? But once you fully daven, now already you're not allowed to eat until you make kiddush. Okay, so that's the din. Problem is that a lot of women don't want to make their own kiddush. So how are we going to get around this? Right? Not that we're looking to get around the halacha, but what can make it the most comfortable for women? So there's a major leniency for Moshe Feinstein, which many in seminaries a lot of girls in the high school seminaries learn this leniency, and it's important to know this leniency. Moshe Feinstein says that the chiyuv of kiddush, the requirement to make kiddush, doesn't happen until the husband comes home from shul. So meaning, let's say you said brachas and that's all you're going to daven. You're still allowed to eat because it's considered as if you're before davening, because your husband hasn't yet come home from shul. Why is this? Because he says there's a requirement for a couple to eat the Shabbos meal together. And since the husband is not yet required to eat the Shabbos meal because he still is in the middle of davening, so therefore the wife is supposed to eat with him. So she is not required to eat a meal yet because her husband's not home. It would be wrong for her to eat a meal before the husband comes home, just like it would be wrong for the husband to eat a meal before the wife comes home. They're supposed to eat together. So since they're supposed to eat together, so therefore she is reliant on the husband, and therefore Moshe Feinstein says that until the husband comes home from shul, there is no requirement for the woman to hear kiddush, and therefore she is allowed to eat and drink and whatever she wants without kiddush. So that is a major leniency, and we go with this leniency, but this is a leniency for Moshe Feinstein. Again, his leniency is that couples are supposed to eat the Shabbos Suda together. So therefore, the woman cannot eat her Shabbos meal until her husband comes home from shul. Since she cannot eat her Shabbos meal before her husband comes home from shul, so her requirement for kiddush didn't yet start. So therefore, she's allowed to eat. Okay, I hope that's clear. If I'm not being clear, somebody please post that I'm not being clear and I should explain. Okay, so that's what Moshe Feinstein says, and that's what you can rely on to not make kiddush before. That you don't have to make kiddush before eating until the husband comes home. However, once the husband comes home, then you're not allowed to eat anymore. That's for sure. According to all opinions, once the husband comes home and like you're preparing the meal and you say, oh, let me just pop a little bit of this food into my mouth and let me just you cannot do that. Once the husband's home, then the requirement for kiddush kicks in, and you are not allowed to eat until kiddush. Okay, now Ramosha says this doesn't apply, though. This is important. Ramosha says this leniency does not apply if the woman davened. I see somebody just posted that. If the woman already finished davening, then she cannot. Ramosha's leniency does not apply. This is assuming that the woman does not daven or she hasn't davened yet, right? But once the woman's davened, then Ramosha's leniency does not does not apply. Ramasha writes this in the tshuva that he explains this. He writes it and he says that once she davens, then she has to make kiddush. Again, and also somebody else posted, unmarried girls in the family, this leniency does not apply either, right? Because they don't have to eat with their father. There's a specific requirement for spouses to eat with each other. There's no requirement. Yes, of course, the family should eat together, but there's no requirement to do that. So therefore, an unmarried girl or a guest does not have this leniency. So therefore, if they only daven brachas, etc., then and that's the only thing they always daven, then a single girl would not be able to rely on this, and she would have to make kiddush before she wants to eat. Okay, so again, we have Ramash's leniency that the spouse, the wife, can eat up until the husband comes home. That does not work if she's already davened, and it does not work for any other girl in the house. It works just for spouses. It doesn't work for parents. It doesn't work for siblings. It doesn't work for kids. It doesn't work for guests. Okay, as it is, I think single girls should be davening. I don't see an excuse why single girls shouldn't be davening. We pass in that women do have to daven every day, but they have a leniency because they have to take care of the household. A single girl, unless the single girl is also taking care of the household, which a lot do, Baruch Hashem. But if not, all things being equal, they should not just roll out of bed right before the meal and not daven. I don't know if they should make the men have to wait before they daven. That's a different shmooze. But that's the basic halacha. Also in the winter, just be careful because chatzos is around nowadays. It's around 5 to 12 or around 12 o'clock, which a lot of times men are not home before then. You cannot daven after that. Women cannot daven either. It's not. They can say brachas. Brachas could be said. Kriya Shema could be said, but Shemona Esrei, the latest is chatzos, which in the winter is quite early. Yeah. So now, what are we? Okay, so now what happens if the woman davened already and she wants to eat? There's absolutely nothing wrong with a woman making kiddush. For whatever reason, women have this fear of making kiddush. There's absolutely nothing wrong with a woman making kiddush. And they should make kiddush. It would actually be wrong to eat something to not make kiddush, right? Now, just have to know the halachas of making kiddush, which is not anything complicated. You don't have to say any of the psukim before. That's all extracurricular. All you need to do is Shabbos morning. 2 weeks ago, we discussed that a woman can even make kiddush Friday night if she needs to eat or drink something. There, you need to make the whole kiddush. But Shabbos morning, kiddush Shabbos morning, I should have explained this before, but let's just explain it now. Kiddush Shabbos morning is called Kiddusha Rabbah. I don't know if you ever looked in a bencher. It's called Kiddusha Rabbah, the Great Kiddush. The reason why it's called the Great Kiddush is it's because it's not really Kiddush at all. All it is a Bar Priya Gofen if you're drinking wine. That's all it is Bar Priya Gofen. And the reason why Chachamim instituted it is because they said, well, Friday night we have to make a Kiddush before we eat the meal. So Shabbos day meal, which is considered more chashuv than the Friday night meal, which we'll hopefully discuss soon, how can we not drink a cup of wine before it? Everything in Yiddishkeit involves cups of wine. Right? A bris there's wine by a bris, there's wine by a pidyon haben, there's wine by a chuppah, wine by Sheva Brachos. Every time there's Birchas Hamazon, really, if it's a minyan or a mezuman, it's supposed to be wine. So anything important that happens in Yiddishkeit has wine with it. So all of a sudden we eat this major meal Shabbos day, which is considered very chashuv, and there's no wine. So therefore Chachamim said, you need to make Kiddush before. And they called it Kiddusha Rabbah, the Great Kiddush, and that people shouldn't belittle it, because when you take a step back and you look at it, it's not, there's no Kiddush here, it's just I'm making a bracha on a cup of wine. So they called it Kiddusha Rabbah, the Great Kiddush, right? So basically all you have to do is just make a Bar Priya Gofen. So for those women that can tolerate wine or grape juice, so then you just take a cup, preferably a kais, fill it to the top, make a Bar Priya Gofen, and then that's it, you made Kiddush. Now, however, there's a halacha called Kiddush b'makom suda. Kiddush Makom Soda means Kiddush has to be accompanied by eating. I think we discussed it 2 weeks ago. We'll just let's make sure we have it again clear that Kiddush has to be in the place of has to be together with a meal. Normally we wash for Hamaitzi right afterwards. That's Kiddush in the place of the Suda. If you cannot, or you don't want to wash Hamaitzi, so then you have to have, preferable is cake. Preferable is cake, because that sort of takes the place of a meal. But you shouldn't have that much cake. But your cake would be, you want a kizayis. Kizayis a cake, which is not that much cake. Cake, crackers, cookies, all these types of things. Then that's what you should do. So you just take a cup of wine, grape juice. You could take schnapps too, and you make a bar priya gofen. You don't have to say the psukim before. You can if you want, and then you eat your cake, and then you're fine. Right? Yes, you can make kiddush for this. A lot of men make kiddush on schnapps in the morning. It's an interesting thing. I never saw anybody make kiddush on beer. I don't know why, but it doesn't seem like that's minig. But it's called chamar medina, making kiddush on wine. That's part of the social drinks of that particular society. Anything that you drink in a social gathering would be considered okay for kiddush. We prefer not to do that Friday night, but Shabbos day you can rely on that. So therefore, if you're going to have a coffee, it's no problem. So what you do is, if you want to have a coffee after your daven, so then you can make the kiddush could be shahakol. It's no problem, because it's called chamar medina. So you can make the kiddush, and you could have other women in mind, no problem. So therefore, what you can do is you can take your coffee, but here make sure you fill your coffee as close. It doesn't have to be full to the top of the cup, but you can make your coffee and fill it up to near the top. And then when you say your shahakol, then you have in mind that it's your kiddush. And then the only thing is you have to make sure you drink at least 1.5 ounces at once. Just like in kiddush, you have to drink 1.5 ounces. The cup should be 3.5 ounces big, but you have to drink a majority of that 3.3 ounces. So it's around 1.6 ounces. Just make sure to drink that much of it within 2 minutes. And then you have your cake, and then you were yotze kiddush, no problem. Okay. If you're having tea, you could do the same thing with tea. So again, it's really not, I imagine most people, the thing that they want to have in the morning is their coffee. So therefore, you can make your kiddush. Just have in mind that after you daven, you can have in mind that that's your kiddush. I see a lot of posts about the coffee and the schnapps. Kiddush and Havdalah. Kiddush in the morning and Havdalah could be made on something called chamar medina. That's a whole different shmooze what chamar medina is, but basically chamar medina is a social drink. Since it's considered a social drink that people eat in more social gatherings, so that's considered chashuv, and therefore that would work for kiddush. Right? Now, like soda, for example, Rav Moshe Feinstein says soda is not, most people don't drink soda for drinking, meaning they have it because they're thirsty. That's not called a social drink. Meaning something when you have guests over, so when you say, oh, you thirsty, I'll bring you soda. But if it's the chashuv of a guest, you'll serve a tea, you'll serve beer, you'll serve schnapp, meaning it's something that's elevated. Soda is not an elevated drink, so therefore you would not be able to make kiddush on soda. But tea, yes. Coffee, yes. Beer, yes. Schnapps, yes. So these, because they're a little bit more chashuv. So therefore that would work. It can work theoretically for Friday night, but not as much, because Friday night the kiddush could be it's from the Torah. The kiddush, like we said, Shabbos morning, is just trying to elevate the meal, to have something chashuv, something special to drink before your meal. So normally we do it with wine, but you can do it with a social drink too. So yes, wine would be better and grape juice would be better. But bottom line is many men in shul are making their kiddush on alcohol, on schnapps. That's a whole different story, whether they can do it on the small schnapps glasses. Most places can say you can't do it on that. So therefore, Schnapps, schnapps should really be in a regular kais of 3.3 ounce kais, and you should drink the majority of that, which would be around 1.6 ounces, unless you have a specific Messiah that allows you to make kiddush on a schnapps glass. But that's a whole different schmooze for a different time. I don't think it's kedai to spend our time with discussing the whole schnapps thing. But again, the bottom line is that yes, you can be yaitze your kiddush with coffee. Just make sure you have mezainis. I saw that somebody posted that theoretically you could have a double amount of the grape juice, and that's considered b'makam seuda, right? Which is true, but if we don't, that there are opinions like that, we try not to rely on those opinions. So therefore, it's not preferable. It's preferable to have some mezainis. But if you don't want to, and you want to drink, just make sure you drink the entire coffee, or iced coffee even. At least drink 3.5 ounces within 2 minutes, and that would also be considered kiddush. Okay. Let me just make sure I'm answering all the. Yes, you need anybody making kiddush to be yaitze. Eating the mezainis has nothing to do with whether you're being yaitze other people in kiddush or not. Anybody who wants to be yaitze kiddush has to have makam suda, has to have mezainis, right? Yes, and that's an important point. Is that when you go to a kiddush, let's say you kiddush in shul, and you hear the man make kiddush, you have to have. If you want to be yaitze kiddush, you have to have a seuda. Otherwise, you are not yaitze kiddush, and you're not allowed to take a drink, right? So basically, when you hear somebody yell out a kiddush, you have to go find crackers or cake or something before you take a drink, because otherwise you're not yaitze the kiddush. Kiddush has to be the makam seuda. So at a kiddush, just make sure you're near some cake, kichel. Sponge cake is not so simple, by the way. Once we're discussing it, sponge cake seems to be like a go-to staple by kiddushim. Sponge cake. I mean, I'm not going to open my mouth here exactly what sponge cake is, because I'm obviously the least knowledgeable on this Zoom chat about what the cake's made out of. But from what I understand, it's really a majority of sugar. So there's very little flour in it. So you may not have enough for a meal. So that's maybe not a cake that you should have. Maybe have the kokosh cake, etc., etc. But yes. So let's just make sure we have clarity with this makam suda. Anytime you make kiddush, whether it's Friday night, Shabbos day, that kiddush has to be accompanied by a suda, preferable with bread. But if not with bread, then with cake or cookies, something mezainis. B'diavad, if you have 3.5 ounces of wine or grape juice, that would also be considered a suda. But we don't like to rely on that opinion unless we have to. Pesach, when a lot of people can't have cake, right? Shahako cake doesn't really work for this. It has to be flour. It has to be something that you'd say ala michya on. So then Pesach, we rely on that opinion to have 3 ounces of wine or grape juice or whatever it is. But again, you're not yaitze. You're not yaitze your kiddush unless you make a mezainis, and it has nothing to do with whether you're being mitzi others, you're not being a mitzi others. That's what you have to do. So now if you heard kiddush in shul and you had your mezainis, then according to halacha, you're done with kiddush and you can just go home and eat without making kiddush. There is an opinion that says that before the meal you should also make kiddush, just because, like we said, you really want to have kiddush before the meal. That is a stringency. So that many are makbid on it, but according to halacha, you don't have to. So if the entire family goes to a kiddush in shul and everybody heard kiddush and they made sure to eat, so then you could just come home and wash and start your meal. Although it would be better to still make kiddush before, but it's not required. Fruit is really, using fruit as a suda is really not simple at all. So it shouldn't be used. Can you talk between hearing kiddush and eating the mezainis? Really, you could talk. It's not preferable, but really you could talk, but you got to make sure you have that mazonos, because if you don't have that mazonos within 2 minutes of the kiddush, then you're not yotze, then you're not going to be yotze. If you can't find mazonos, then you were not yotze kiddush. You can try and find schnapps and have 3 ounces of that, or wine or grape juice, but yes, you are not yotze kiddush if you didn't eat mazonos. That's whether you made the kiddush, whether somebody else made the kiddush, and that's the halacha. Yes, you want to. Yes, it could be lakshan kugel, and it can be barley in the cholent. If you'd have enough barley, you'd have to make sure you have enough barley in the cholent, depending on how much barley there is. But that would be, anything mazonos that would require an ala michya would be enough of malkam suda. Okay, so that's basically it. So again, Shabbos morning, if you want to have a coffee and you've already davened, so just have in mind that coffee is kiddush, and then try and have some cake or cookies or crackers or something like that. You are allowed to have kiddush at home with schnapps. I can't tell you that it's not better to have grape juice or wine. Wine is the best. Clearly, wine is the best. Second best would be grape juice. Third best would be schnapps. But many people in Klal Yisrael, many have the minhag to make it on schnapps, and that's okay. Can you eat the fruit and then eat the mazonos before you? No, you have to have the mazonos first, because you are not yotze your kiddush until your kiddush is. It's as if you don't have the mazonos right after you make the kiddush, and it's as if you didn't hear kiddush. So therefore, you cannot have the fruit before the kiddush or a drink. Yes, if you're at a kiddush and you didn't actually hear the kiddush, then you are not allowed to drink. Correct. You're not allowed to drink unless your husband is still davening in a different shul. Then you're not required to hear kiddush yet, like we've said. Now I just want to say that there are leniencies. So sometimes you're very weak and you don't have the strength to make kiddush, and there's basically, we can be lenient in desperate situations that women don't have to hear kiddush, because there's an opinion that women do not have to hear kiddush Shabbos morning. I want to be clear. We don't paskin like that. We don't paskin that women do need to hear kiddush, but there are opinions that say that women do not have to hear kiddush on Shabbos morning. And there's also opinions that we don't paskin like, that snacking before kiddush during Shabbos day, snacking and drinking before kiddush Shabbos day is allowed. Right? I want to be clear. We do not paskin like either one of these two opinions. Okay, but if somebody is desperate, let's say you got to the kiddush and you're hungry because you walked 10-15 minutes and you need a drink, and there's nobody to make kiddush for you. You can't find anybody to make kiddush, and there's somebody speaking, and so then you would be able to rely on these opinions, a combination of the opinions, which is A, women don't need to hear kiddush, and 2, drinking and taking a small amount of food before kiddush is allowed Shabbos morning. Those two opinions, combining them, you can rely on them in a desperate situation. But we need to make it very clear. We don't paskin like either one of these opinions, but as a combination, if you're desperate, you can rely on that if necessary. Okay, so somebody who's not feeling well, who doesn't drink coffee and can't tolerate grape juice or schnapps, and they're weak, can rely on this 100%. But it would be, we have to make sure to explain that you have to know that we don't pass like either one of these two opinions, but you also have to know that you can rely on these leniencies if necessary. If necessary, you can rely on the combination of both opinions. Meaning you wouldn't be able to eat challah, because that's not a snack. You wouldn't be able to have a lot of cake, but you'd be able to have, let's say, fruit or a small amount of cake, because we're going to rely on two opinions that we don't normally paskin like, but as a combination, we can rely on them. So it's important. It's important to know that there is that leniency out there, but it should not be relied on for in a normal circumstance. Yes, the same halacha applies to Rosh Hashanah. And on Yom Tov, yes, the same halachas apply. So again, it's really not that big a deal for those that drink coffee or tea. So you can just have in mind that you're making kiddush with that, and then you're fine. Yes, so basically we're saying that yes, the kiddush, your coffee can be kiddush, but if you're drinking your coffee before you daven, then you're not required to have kiddush, so you don't need to. You can drink the coffee without it being kiddush. We're talking about if you already daven, and now you want to drink something, so you have in mind that the coffee that you're drinking is the kiddush. I hope that's clear. The coffee before you daven, you don't need to have kiddush because you're not required to eat. You're not required to eat the meal yet, so therefore you could just drink the coffee without kiddush. Once you've davened, now you cannot eat until you make kiddush. And you don't have to make kiddush on grape juice and wine. It'd be preferable, but if you don't like it, which a lot of women don't like it, so then you make your kiddush on coffee. It's no different than making kiddush on schnapps, which many people do. Yes, let me check any more questions here. If somebody's on can't eat mazanas for health or dietary reasons, so I'm saying, what are you doing for the meal? This is a common question. People on diets, the keto diets and all these type of things, and they can't have bread. So you have to figure out, first you have to know why you're on the diet. If you're on the diet for just to lose weight, so then, if it's a health reason, so then it's maybe important. So then you can maybe rely on the opinions that you don't have to have bread. But really, the more important thing is having bread as a meal. So you'd have to ask an individual question about that. Can you drink water before hitting kiddush? No, you cannot. Once you've already davened, you cannot drink water before kiddush unless you want to rely on the both opinions that we just discussed. So yeah, I'm just trying to scroll back to see all the questions here. So somebody posted here. Somebody asked, do you have to have a motzi within 3 minutes of hearing kiddush? The answer to that's an excellent question, and something that I'd like to bring up. Yes, really, you're supposed to wash as soon as kiddush is over, but a lot of times it's not under your control. But because you have men there and they're schmoozing, the halacha is that the kiddush has to be makom suda. This is a problem Friday night also. People make kiddush, and then they don't go and they'll sit around and they'll schmooze for 5-10 minutes or whatever it is till they wash. That is incorrect. You're supposed to wash as soon as you can. Now, according to the halacha, though, as long as you're busy with meal things, then that would be okay. Like, for example, you made kiddush and then you want to bring food to the table. So that's called being busy with the meal. So that's not an interruption between the kiddush and the eating the hamotzi, right? But if everybody just sits around and starts reading newspapers before, which whether that's allowed on Shabbos is a different schmooze for a different time, right? But everybody is schmoozing about politics over this and that, then that is incorrect. You have to go wash so that your kiddush is b'makom suda, and also the proper thing would be to not start serving the meal before and start preparing things in the kitchen. The proper thing would be to wash hamotzi right away. But again, as long as you're being busy with the meal, then it's not a problem. So then, but you should try and wash as soon as you can. So if a woman only davens a little bit every day, and the husband already came home, then she would have to make kiddush first. Yes, if the husband did not come home yet, then we have Rav Moshe Feinstein that says that you don't have to have kiddush because the husband is not home yet. But if you only daven a little bit every day, then theoretically you should make kiddush. If you're drinking your coffee, you should have in mind that coffee is kiddush. If a woman davens every day, then you can eat before you daven. You can eat before you daven. But once you daven, then you need to make kiddush and drink. right? That's again, let's be clear. If you daven every day, then you have to, and you're allowed to eat and drink before you daven. Once you daven, then you have to make kiddush or have to hear kiddush. And yes, women can be motzi other women in kiddush, and it's not preferable, but women can also be motzi men in kiddush. If you have wine, you're still allowed to use coffee or chamar medina. Yes, that's also fine. Again, it's preferable to have wine, but you can. No, you cannot drink water before Kiddush on Shabbos day. Again, there are opinions that say you can go with, if you go with the both lenient opinions as a combination, then you'd be able to, but it's really, once you've davened, you cannot have water either before Kiddush. No, you cannot make Kiddush before you have a chiyuv for Kiddush. I mean, again, Kiddush is bar priya gofen, so there's no loss. All you're drinking is wine and making bar priya gofen or a coffee or a schnapps and saying sha'akol. That's not there's nothing wrong. It's not a bracha levatala as long as you drink it. But that doesn't, you're not yotze your Kiddush before then, meaning you'd have to make Kiddush again. Meaning what I'm saying would have in mind is in Kiddush is that if you're just drinking your coffee, so then that's essentially your Kiddush. So what I mean by have in mind in Kiddush is to make sure you say a shahakol on your coffee, and then make sure right away to eat some cake or something like that, so that coffee will be your Kiddush. So you can't eat. Men cannot eat before davening unless they're weak. If they're weak, they can eat before davening. We said women are usually a little weaker because they're davening later in the day, and also they're preparing the meal, and there's a lot going on. So therefore, they are allowed to eat a little bit before davening so that they have the strength to go about their day. So then somebody's asking here, if you only daven brachas, do you need to hear kiddush? Half days of the week you daven full davening, but you always say brachas. So that's the complicated area. That's sort of the no man's land. So basically, what you should do is if you know you're going to daven the full davening Shabbos morning, then you can eat without kiddush before you're davening. Right? If you're not going to daven Shabbos day and you're just going to say brachas, then once you say your brachas, then if the husband has not come home yet, then you can rely on Rav Moshe Feinstein that you're not required to hear kiddush yet. But and because you haven't davened, but once you daven, you cannot rely on that Rav Moshe Feinstein. So again, just to try and be clear, if you know you're going to daven and even though you've said brachas, you're allowed to eat. If you know you're not going to daven and you just said brachas, then if till the husband comes home from shul, you're allowed to eat. Once the husband comes home from shul, then you're not allowed to eat. I hope I'm not confusing everybody and making them crazy with these halachas, but again, that's just the way it is. A woman does have a chiyuv. The woman does have a chiyuv in kiddush. Yeah, I'm gonna try and go over all this. So once we're on the subject, so basically, another thing is that it is not halacha. The halacha is that you don't have to drink from the wine that somebody makes kiddush. Not Friday night, not Shabbos day, not on Yom Tov. It is not a halacha that you have to drink the wine from kiddush. If you don't like wine, don't drink wine. If you don't like grape juice, you don't have to drink the grape juice. Is it better to? Yeah, it's praiseworthy to have some of the kiddush. But if you don't like it, you don't have to have it. If you're at a kiddush in a shul, I imagine whichever man is making kiddush, it's not going to get to you any of the kiddush, which is fine. You don't have to be yotze kiddush. You don't have to drink from the wine at all. Again, so then let's just go over this. Let's just try and go over this, and I hope I can say it clear. Basically, so there's one more question here. No, so if you daven brachas and you normally daven Shemona Esrei after that, then you are allowed to eat. It's only once you finish davening what you normally daven, then the chiyuv of kiddush kicks in. Right? Once again, if you only say brachas every day and that's all you daven, So then theoretically, you have a requirement to make Kiddush when you want to eat. However, Ramosha Feinstein says that since you have a mitzvah to eat with your spouse, the spouses have mitzvahs to eat with each other. Therefore, if the husband was not yet home from shul, the wife is not required to make Kiddush, and she does not have to make Kiddush if she wants to eat. That's if she didn't daven, full davening. Once you daven a full davening, then you have to make Kiddush. You have to make Kiddush even if the husband is not home yet. If you haven't davened the full davening, then you're not required to hear Kiddush. If you're the type that only says brachas, though, then really the Chi of Kiddush kicks in. But if the husband's not home from shul yet, then you rely on Ramosha Feinstein that you don't have to hear Kiddush. But again, like we said, that only applies to spouses. That does not apply to single girls in the house, because they're not required to eat with their father or mother the Shabbos Suda. So I hope that that's clear. Okay, let me just say again. There is a requirement to make Kiddush Shabbos morning. The requirement is only once you've davened. Once you've davened, now you're required to hear Kiddush, because now you're required to eat a meal. Before davening, you are not required to hear Kiddush. You're not required to eat a meal. The requirement to eat a meal only happens after you've davened. Then you're required to make Kiddush. If you've not davened yet, you're not required to hear Kiddush. That's why a man who wants to drink a coffee before davening does not have to make Kiddush, because he's not required to eat a meal yet, because the meal requirement doesn't start until you finish davening, right? But once you daven, now you're not allowed to eat until you make Kiddush. Now, again, we did say that there are lenient opinions that say that since women, again, we don't pass them like this, but there are opinions that say that there are some opinions that say that women don't need to hear Kiddush Shabbos morning, which we don't pass them like that. And there are opinions that you are allowed to eat a little bit before hearing Kiddush. That would be even for men. We don't pass them like any of those. But for a woman who's weak or is for whatever reason needs to eat or drink, and she can't make the Kiddush by herself, then we would rely on those opinions that she'd be allowed to do that. If your husband comes home and makes Kiddush and then you daven, do you need to make Kiddush again? Yes, you would need to make Kiddush again, because the Kiddush that you heard, you weren't required to hear. Meaning, maybe according to Ramosha Feinstein, you would say that you were not allowed, that you don't have to, but it would be wise to make Kiddush again, because you weren't really required to make Kiddush because you haven't davened. On a regular day, do you have to say brachas before eating? All things being equal, if you had the strength to do that, then yes, it would be better to eat daven brachas before you ate. But if you're really starving and you don't have the time to concentrate, etc., then it would be okay. But yes, it would be preferable to eat before, to say some brachas before you daven. Now, a bracha achrona is an excellent question. Do you need to make a bracha achrona on the mezainis before you wash hamotzim? That is an extremely complicated question, and the best thing to do is to make an alamichya and then wait 15 minutes before you wash for bread, which most of the time happens anyways, because you have to clean up the kiddush and prepare the meal, etc., etc. You have to walk home from the kiddush and shul. So then that's usually what happens anyways. So, but you should try and make the alamichya, and this applies to men, women equally. Try and make the alamichya first, and then wait 15 minutes, and then wash. That would take away that takes away all the shilas. Okay, I hope that was clear. We spent a lot of time on that. Again, just to reiterate, there is a chiyuv for women to hear kiddush, and we should if you need to make kiddush, then it's not that big a deal. You just take a cup of grape juice, cup of wine. If you can't, then you can use coffee, you could use tea. Just make sure you have a little mezainis afterwards, and then you made your kiddush, and that would be that. once we're on that subject, so I guess we won't get to, the cooking. I would like to start the cooking next week, Be'ez Hashem. But Havdalah, you are allowed to drink. For Havdalah, you are allowed to drink water before Havdalah. For whatever reason, the Chachamim did not said that water on before Havdalah is okay. Seltzer would be okay. Soda is a flavor. It's debatable whether it's okay. But that's before the men come home from shul, after the men come home from shul, whatever it is. Matzah Yom Kippur comes up a lot on Matzah Yom Kippur. If you're waiting for the men, drinking is 100% fine. Drinking water / seltzer is 100% fine before Havdalah. That's for everybody. Now, what a woman's once we're on that subject, we're going to end here. So those that don't want to hear this, feel free to log off. But we'll end with this, since we already started discussing what the woman's requirement is for davening. So it's actually a machlokes rishonim what davening is. This is I don't know if we discussed it 2 weeks ago or not, but we'll repeat it. It's actually a fascinating machlokes. It's the machlokes between the Rambam and the Ramban, whether davening is from the Torah or not. If we pass in we'll get back to the psak in a minute. If you pass in this is the fascinating part, and I hope it's not too confusing. If you paskin like the Rambam, that davening is from the Torah, then all you have to do is say any sort of request from Hashem, like a thank you to Hashem or a request to Hashem, and then your yaitza from the Torah, right? Which is what the Rambam holds. Rambam holds, and this is for men and women. All in order to be yaitza your mitzvah d'oraisa of davening, you have to make a request of Hashem, and then your yaitza from the mitzvah d'oraisa. Okay. The Ramban disagrees, and he says there is no mitzvah in the Torah to daven. The mitzvah in the Torah to daven there is no mitzvah in the Torah to daven. It's a mitzvah d'Rabbanon. Okay, it's a mitzvah d'Rabbanon, and the Rabbanon made specific ways to daven, which is basically Shemona Esrei. Right? If you paskin like the Ramban, which is the Rabbanon, then you have to daven Shemona Esrei in order to be Yotze Tefillah. Right? So that's the fascinating thing. If you go with the Rambam, that the davening is from the Torah, then you don't have to daven Shemona Esrei, because any sort of request from Hashem is good. If you say that davening is from the Rabbanon, and the Rabbanon said, yes, you have to daven every day, and that davening has to take on the form, has to be done in the form of Shemona Esrei, then you're required to daven Shemona Esrei. So usually something from the Torah is more strict. Here, it's the opposite. Again, if you say that you go with the Rambam, that davening is from the Torah, then all you have to do is do some form of davening. The Torah there's nowhere in the Torah does it say anything about Shemona Esrei, right? So if you say that davening is from the Torah, it just means you have to ask Hashem for something. So once you make a bracha and you ask Hashem for something, you are yotze your tefillah. If you go with the Ramban, that it's from the Rabbanon, and the Rabbanon said you only daven Shemona Esrei, the only way to daven is the way the Chachamim said to do it, which is Shemona Esrei, then you have to daven Shemona Esrei, which means that if you go with the Ramban, who's the more lenient one, that says the whole mitzvah of davening is from the Rabbanon, not from the Torah, then you have to daven Shemona Esrei, which we paskin like the Ramban, that davening is from the Rabbanon. Therefore, women and men have to daven Shemona Esrei every day, right? Again, I hope I'm being clear with what's the fascinating part here. Normally, when you have a mitzvah from the Torah, you have to do more, not less. Here, if you say that davening is from the Torah didn't give us any specific way to daven. It just said, ask something from Hashem. Okay, so I said a bracha in the morning and I asked something from Hashem. So now I'm yotze. According to Ramban, there's no mitzvah from the Torah to daven. It was the Rabbanon, and the Rabbanon said you have to daven, but you have to daven this way. You can't just daven whichever way you want. You have to daven Shemona Esrei. So we paskin, the way the Mishnah Berurah says it, we really paskin that davening is the Rabbanon. So therefore, you have to daven Shemona Esrei. So that is basically where that whole disagreement comes from. So we paskin that lechatchila that davening is the rabbanon, and therefore women should be davening Shemona Esrei every day. However, women, they're busy and it's difficult to find time, so then we rely on the Rambam that davening is from the Torah, and therefore any request you make from Hashem covers you. But lechatchila, we say that women should daven Shachris and Mincha. It seems like Ma'ariv, women were not makabel on themselves, but Shachris and Mincha, women should try and daven. But we know from the Chafetz Chaim, from his wife, that she did not daven, because when a woman is taking care of a family, that is more important than davening, and therefore we rely on the Rambam's opinion, and it's not a problem. So that's the basic background of davening. So I hope that was clear. Okay, so let me try and answer some more questions. So if you only daven brachas and the men are not home yet, and you make a coffee, no, you rely on Rav Moshe Feinstein. The accepted psak is that you can rely on Rav Feinstein. You don't have to have in mind Kiddush. If you want, you can, but you don't have to. Waiting 15 minutes after you finish the mezonos, yes. Ala gefen on the wine. If you had 3 ounces of if you tasted wine, then you should say ala gefen. If you didn't taste wine, then you don't say ala gefen. It would be better to say brachas. If you normally daven every day, then it would be better to say brachas, because at least you're acknowledging Hashem. Then eat a little bit and then continue davening. That would be the best way of doing it, because at least you are acknowledging Hashem before you ate something. The Chassidish leniency for women don't daven, that's where it comes from. Yes, that we go with. We paskin, the Mishnah Berurah at least paskins that really women do have to daven every day, at least Shachas and Mincha. But if they're taking care of families, then they don't have to. We go with the Rambam that just making some sort of request is okay. If you hold like the Ramban, are you allowed to eat small amount before davening? Yes, because if you need it for your strength, then you could. So the sip of wine is meaning if you're already making ala mich, of course, in a sip of wine, you would not, if you only have a sip, in order to make a bar nefashos or ala gefen, you need to have at least 3.3 ounces or whatever it is that you're eating. However, if you're making ala michya anyways, and you also had some wine, so then you also put in ala gefen. If you didn't, it's fine. But just a sip of wine without having any mezonos, you would not make ala michya. You would just you would not make an ala gefen. It's only if you're making ala michya anyways, and you also happen to have had some wine, so then you're okay. Then you're okay with just saying ala gefen included in there. Okay. I hope this is all clear. I hope it didn't stress anybody out with these halachas of kiddush. It just comes up a lot, and there's a lot of confusion. So a woman who davens after kiddush with her husband at home, the husband should make another. I mean, the wife could also make another kiddush, but yes, I would say that a woman. Again, I don't think you would be required to, but it would definitely be preferable that if the wife davens after husband's already home, so now her requirement to have kiddush kicks in, and then that she should make kiddush. She should make kiddush again. Yes, 100%. Okay. So again, just to review, there is a mitzvah to have kiddush, but don't get stressed. The main thing, like we've discussed many times, is Shabbos has to be a peaceful time. So if you missed kiddush, you didn't hear kiddush, there's always a lenient opinions to rely on. But again, we're talking in the ultimate situation is that if you've already finished davening, then you want to eat or drink something, just make kiddush, and it's a pretty easy thing to do. You can just make yourself the coffee and have in mind that coffee is your kiddush, have a little mezonos with it, and then you've made your kiddush, and then you're fine. Of course, you could have grape juice and do that also. There actually is, I wasn't going to say this over, but just to make sure, just to calm anybody down that gets nervous, the Stipler was known, the stipler of Reb Chaim Kanievsky's father, was known to tell his family that if a woman wants to eat cake on Shabbos morning and she didn't make Kiddush or she can't make Kiddush, so he basically said you could take 2 pieces of cake or cookies, put it like it's like sort of like Lechem Mishnah, and have in mind by the Mizainis that you're doing it to make Kiddush. I'm just putting that out there, that there is an opinion like that. I mean, it's better to drink to make the Kiddush on the coffee, but there is an opinion that even doing that is a form of Kiddush. So that can be relied on also. You can rely on, if you said Bracha Shabbos morning, you can rely on Ramash's Psak. It's been accepted by women, at least in America, I don't know about Eretz Yisrael, that you can rely on Ramash's Psak, and that you are not required, as long as you didn't daven, that as long as the men are not home from shul yet, you don't have to make Kiddush. Okay? I hope that was clear. If it's not clear, let me know, and I'll just rediscuss it again next week. Hopefully next week we'll start with the, how to open the oven doors Friday night, how to take soup, making tea. Hopefully we'll discuss that as Hashem next week. Everybody should have themselves a good tvach. I was giving another shir tonight. Somebody made a joke on this, because you're normally, when you say good tvach to somebody, so you're supposed to reply with good tvach and then add a bracha. So a fellow said good tvach, good yar. I was like, well, maybe tonight, New Year's Eve, you shouldn't answer with good yar. Maybe it's gayish. I don't think that's an issue, but at least we'll end off with a little bit of an interesting din. But yes, everybody should have a good tvach and a good yar, and have a good week.